question, and that will be just for any of you just to raise the issue of India for us briefly, if one of you would like to add that to the discussion. China is obviously, you know, the issue of the day, but India is moving rapidly as well. Would one of you like to address that issue? Mr. Helm.
I'll take a shot at it. I think in the negotiations, as I said, sort of in response to Mr. Sensenbrenner's comments, I think India is the outlier. They have been the most hard line on the rhetoric about, you know, we have to have equal per capita emissions. They've been very hard line on the financing. They've been very hard line on not supporting unilateral actions. You notice I talked about countries are doing things and not being paid for it. To date, India has done very little that wasn't paid for in the CDM and that sort of thing. So I think if you look at the spectrum of the debate, India is at the far right along with the Saudis. And I think we can expect a pattern like we saw in the Mercury negotiations where China moved, India was embarrassed and had to sort of follow behind China. I think we probably see the same kind of pattern. So like India is the toughest nut to crack. We do some work in India. Our sense is that Indian industry is quite progressive on these issues, particularly in the key sectors, cement, steel, and so on. They are really pushing the envelope in terms of improving intensity, improving efficiency, and that sort of thing. And the difficulty is the government and getting the government to come around. So I would put them in a special category in terms of where we stand.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the implementation problems in these developing countries. There are impressive renewable energy targets in India, Brazil, Mexico, but give me your honest views as to the implementation probability in each of these countries. That would be very helpful to us. We'll begin with you, Ms. Fenimore.
I think you've hit upon the key problem in China. And responding to what some of the members had asked earlier, I do believe that there is tremendous political will at the national level to achieve its renewable energy targets and energy efficiency targets. The problem where they fall down is in implementation at the local level. Provincial government leaders, heads of the major enterprises or factories. And what I'm very heartened to see is movement in this direction as well, although much needs to be done. And I think one of the most effective mechanisms that the government's just put into place is a system whereby the job promotions and actually ability to keep the jobs of the provincial governors is going to depend in part upon how well they meet these ambitious renewable energy, energy efficiency, and emission reduction goals. And I have found that single initiative has done more to concentrate the minds of the provincial leaders who are responsible.
So are you saying that in Beijing they tell the provincial governors you're going to be in or out of a job based upon your implementation of renewable energy and efficiency targets?
Well, in fact, yes. That's not the only factor that's going to be considered, but
that would be the most important factor, though.
Well, absolutely.
Whether or not
but
you had
until recently, it was only their job security was only based on how well they grew their local GDP. And that's, of course, because they have a different political system. We could not do this in the United States, but they have an integrated political system where provincial governors do, in fact, report to the central government. So the government has the ability to do so, and it's made a huge difference.
But we understand how Tammany Hall politics work. I mean, it didn't end that long ago in Boston. So we understand how the local bosses, if they don't get the job done, might not hold on to their jobs. So do you think that that is something that is likely to be enforced?
Yes, we're going to see when the rubber meets the road. It'll be at the end of 2010, at the end of this current 5-year plan. That's when the numbers have to come in. And there'll be, I'm sure, some scapegoats whose heads will roll. However, the concern I have is that the provincial governors are also responsible.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
we hope.
Not always.
Not always.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to refer to page 11 in my written testimony, which I hope is going to be included in the record.
It will be.
Which lists the progress that various developing countries have made against their renewable energy targets. It's an impressive track record. It gives you the indication that they're actually making progress. I wanted to also comment on, while we're talking about governors and states, I don't know if any members of this committee attended the Governors Conference in LA that Governor Schwarzenegger held this past fall. But the ownership that governors and states in the Amazon and Indonesia and China and elsewhere are taking of this issue, and the leadership that they want to demonstrate to the people who vote them into office, is quite clear and impressive, and particularly their desire to join in as part of global agreements and bringing technology to bear and solutions to bear to the local
So
population.
you're saying this might be a tale of two countries, whereas in Brazil, we might be better off with the provincial governors running the
Yeah, in
program and
Brazil-
not the
in
central
Brazil-
government, whereas in China, we might be better off with the central government running it
Yeah.
rather than the provincial governors. So it all depends upon where the most committed public officials are within the nation structure. But at the end of the day, we don't care what their governmental structure is as long as there's a measurable improvement in their production of renewables and their energy efficiency. Mr. Lane, I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer, then I'm going to turn to Mr. Cleaver, and then I'll come back and follow up on my questions. Mr. Lane.
I'll try to beat the minute. Actually, my impression is the provincial communist parties are actually a very important force in the central government, and we shouldn't, I think, look upon the Chinese government as an entirely top-down enterprise in which the provincial governments are operating at the behest of the central government. That's why some of the 5-year plan targets in the past about restraining heavy industries growth have not been implemented because the provincial governments have simply overruled the central government.